finance experience to the Social Security Administration to focus on rooting out waste and fraud. The billionaire presidential advisor has called entitlement spending, and that includes Social Security and Medicare, a key target for cuts, arguing that the federal programs are plagued by fraud. He, Musk, addressed the moves yesterday from the White House lawn.
We're going to be very careful with any interruption to benefits. In fact, only by tackling the waste and fraud in entitlements like Social Security, Medicare, can we actually preserve those programs for the future. Because with unchecked fraud and waste, we won't be able to afford them.
That's Elon Musk yesterday at the White House along with President Trump. With the latest on DOGE activities, we wanted to check in with Bloomberg Intelligence's senior policy analyst, Nathan Dean. He's in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Nathan, good to see you this afternoon. When Elon and when President Trump talk about waste, fraud, and abuse in Social Security and Medicare, what exactly do we know about the preponderance of it?
Yeah, so there's not a ton of information. I mean, obviously, anecdotally, Elon Musk and President Trump like to give stories about, in his joint address to Congress, President Trump mentioned that somebody was older than the nation itself, but those are just anecdotal. There's really not much systemic information that we have going off of at the moment. And from the investment perspective, one of the reasons why we want to pay attention to this so quickly or so importantly is because, if President Trump and Elon Musk want to balance the budget or to decrease the U.S. deficit, they're most likely going to have to tackle these entitlement programs. But we just don't know the scale of it. And from a political perspective, tackling things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid has always been the third rail of politics. So we're not exactly sure. DOGE is still in the early stages of going after these programs, so to speak. They're still doing a lot of work, rather, at the agencies in terms of employees and programs there. But we do think eventually they are going to look greater at Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We just don't know to the full extent how much of it is going to be fraud, waste, or actual business as usual activities.
That's what I wanted to ask you, Nathan. So, how much of this is going to be, forgive me for following in this way, but fraud, waste versus, hey, if you make a certain amount of money, even in your retirement, you're not going to get Social Security benefits, even though you paid so much. Tell me, what are they thinking in terms of, or we don't even know yet?
I don't think they know yet. I mean, I think they're just getting in there and trying to see what the data says. And I would just remind folks that for a lot of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid programs, it would take an act of Congress to change really the parameters of Social Security, for example. Now, obviously, there are things that the president could do. There's things like the rescissions packages or reconciliation, but you can't even touch Social Security via reconciliation. It has to go through appropriations. So for a lot of this, you would have to have 8 Democrats on board, and obviously they're not going to be on board with whatever suggestion President Trump or Elon Musk is saying for these programs. So I think what you'll see is over the next few weeks and months, you'll see more anecdotal stories of waste and fraud that they can point to, perhaps this 300-year-old person who's living somewhere, and just say that this is what they're cutting. But ultimately, for these bigger changes, the things that Republicans need to either pay for these $4.5 trillion in tax cuts or to lower the deficit, you're going to need Congress, and that's going to be a battle playing out later this year outside of the DOGE committee, so to speak.
We also did hear in that clip that we played from Elon Musk, him say, with unchecked fraud and waste, we won't be able to afford them. Just to help fact check that for us, can we afford Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security?
Well, I think, pretty much, I think most traders, at least the ones I talk to, one of the biggest questions I get, whether it's in New York, London, or anywhere, the traders will ask me, when is Washington going to get serious with the deficit? And my response back to them is, when is the market going to tell Washington that there is a concern?
Yeah.
And so, Washingtonians, especially those over on Capitol Hill, are still proceeding as if the deficit is not much of an issue that needs to be addressed. Obviously, Elon Musk disagrees. But what the DOGE committee is doing is they're looking at the areas within the executive branch right now, laying off half the workers at the Department of Education, for example, but you're never going to get to the types of savings that Republicans will want, either for deficit or to pay for these tax cuts, just from looking at the agencies. They're going to have to go after Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid at a certain point. And just a reminder, President Trump has said he's not going to touch any of that. He's only going to touch the waste and fraud. To us, that doesn't seem like there's really going to be much in the way of cuts coming anytime soon.
No, but you bring up a good point, right? How much we've talked about the debt and servicing that debt, how much it is of GDP, and it's been growing. But if you can somehow knock that down ultimately, right, there's more money to spend actually on services, infrastructure, what have you, in the U.S. economy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I think, most of the clients that we talk to are very concerned about the debt and the debt rising. I mean, the interest payments alone has gone up dramatically over the last couple of years. But, Congress has always just been in this standpoint where they really can't negotiate in terms of big cuts. I mean, there's really no agreement because you need a bipartisan act of Congress to do it. We're seeing this play out just this week. On Friday, we potentially may have a government shutdown. This is over a 6-month continuing resolution, not Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid, things that are much more important to the economy than just keeping the government open for 6 more months. So it's much easier for Congress to say, let's kick the can down the road and let's have that discussion. But President Trump and Elon Musk, via the DOGE work that they're doing right now, is trying to bring some very awkward questions to Congress and to Capitol Hill, trying to ensure them that they get some movement here. I'm just not exactly sure they will.
Okay, we've been talking about the idea of potentially a recession quite a bit this week. Another word similar, though, is rescission in the context of a rescissions package. When we were preparing for this conversation with you, you said, keep an eye out for a rescissions package. What exactly is that?
We had to Google a little bit, too. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Exactly. I mean, this is a little wonky here, but, the president does have the ability to offer a formal request to Congress and say, look, I noticed that you have not spent this money. Therefore, I want you to rescind it. So let's say that you're in the clean energy space and there's IRA, Inflation Reduction Act money, or CHIPS Act, semiconductors. If there is CHIPS Act money that has not been spent yet, President Trump could go to Congress and say, you know what, forget about it. Let's just rescind that money. Last time this happened was 2018, and it failed because a lot of Republicans at the time were still kind of on the fence about whether we should rescind some of these, industry boosting funding. So I do anticipate later this year this idea is going to gain some traction. Senator Lindsey Graham has been talking about it. So President Trump can come back and say, look, if you haven't spent the money, let's rescind it. And just to remind folks, this doesn't go through the filibuster. This just requires a majority vote in the House and a majority vote in the Senate. So if you get all Republicans on board, a lot of those unspent monies could be clawed back and you won't see it.
So does that mean every, 4 years, basically, if one president puts in some spending programs and the Congress at the time approves it, it just takes another president, or maybe it's every 2 years, that things can just be reversed?
Well, Congress always has the right via an act of legislation to reverse it. I mean, we saw this during the COVID relief funds. A lot of the CARES Act money, there was about $250 billion in COVID relief funds that was never spent. So future Congress just said, hey, we've got this $250 billion sitting over here. Let's earmark it for something else. So this does happen very often. But this rescissions package is a little bit different. And one of the challenges is going to be, and let's just take the Inflation Reduction Act, or even better, let's take the semiconductors with the CHIPS Act, for example. There's a lot of bipartisan support for this. That bill passed 2022 with a lot of bipartisan support. And so if you are going to go back and say, right, we're going to claw back some of this money, a lot of those individual lawmakers who have plants in their districts that are being built off of this, may say, yeah, I'm just not going to support that. We're going to have to do this another way.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, all governing is local, right?
Yeah, if you
it
think
comes
that
down to it to some extent.
members are getting a tough time in their district from constituents now, just wait until funding gets cut for some of those programs.
All right, Nathan Dean, great stuff. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Policy Analyst Nathan Dean. Still